Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ask T3. I'm your host, Nick Bailey, Chief Real Estate Officer at T360. And we have got a topic that not many people are talking about today. We're right in the midst of the 2025 spring market, and yet there are talks about, are we in a buyer's market? Are things really starting to shift? And we're going to talk about that today. By the way, we have a killer guest for you. Really awesome. But before we get into it, I want to remind you, we want you part of the conversation. Go to AskT3.com, ask us questions, submit ideas that you'd like us to bring back for content for you, and just be part of that conversation. Also, make sure check us out on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So let's get into it. What is happening into this market? Is it a buyer's market? Are things really changing? Are buyers in a position to negotiate more than they have since 2012? Well, to talk about that more, the very famous, infamous, I don't know, one of those, international speaker, coach, and my industry friend, Jared James. Jared, hello, welcome.
Good to meet you, Nick.
Nice to meet you too. Okay, are we in a buyer's market? What do you think?
Okay, so there's a couple ways to look at this, right? I think everybody would, their obvious answer would be yes, just because they would compare it to what we just came out of. And yet statistically, I mean, I looked at this right before we jumped on here, and nationwide, we're at 4.6 months of inventory. And, statistically, they say that, a seller's market is anything 6 months below, a buyer's market's anything 7 months and above, and 6 to 7 months is healthy. And so compared to what we came through, yeah, obviously, because everywhere was 1.4 months of inventory or 1 month or whatever it is. But, when you compare it to what the definition of what it is, technically no, but I don't think that that's the feeling, the sentiment of the overall industry right now. I think most people, if you were to just do a guy on the street, girl on the street, and you walked up to him, like Leno used to do with people, and just like put a camera in there in front of him and ask him a question, I think the high majority of people in our industry, if you were to walk up and say that, would say yes. But the answer is kind of.
Kind of. Okay. Well, this show is known about ask big questions and smart answers. Kind of, I think, is one of the smartest answers we've had so far yet. Really strong, Jared. Okay, let me level set this a minute, because then I want to get into, because something that you're really good at is giving people ideas and helpful hints. But before we get into that, I want to set the stage a little bit. I mentioned in the intro, we haven't really seen a true buyer's market since 2008 to 2012. So let's say 2012 at the end. Let's put a couple other stats on that. 87% of real estate agents that get a license don't have it in 5 years. And so if you fast forward that to say, it's been 13 years that we've basically been in a seller's market, what percentage of agents would you say have never experienced a true buyer's market? What would you guess?
Oh my God, that have never experienced? I mean, my God, that'd be the
true buyer's markets.
Yeah, that'd be the high majority. I mean, I go to events and you say to people, how many of you have had your license since the COVID years? Like, how many of you got it during the COVID years? I call them COVID babies, and they came in, and it was just kind of like, the biggest issue was just getting your offer accepted, because there's so many offers, and the goal was to get the listings, because then there's just so many offers, right? I think the high majority of our industry, probably 70% or more, have never actually dealt with this. And let's be honest too, the stat you just used right there, I think you said 2008, 2010, like somewhere in there. You're talking about 17 years ago. So even those that have experienced that, what does that mean? It was a long time ago. And we are in a completely different place. We're at a place right now where the real conversation people are having is all around affordability. Mm-hmm. And, you get these questions all the time, especially when it comes to first-time home buyers. And they say, well, how are things going to become more affordable? And that's such a difficult thing, because not every question has an answer. We made a decision. I like to say that every choice has an invoice. And we made a decision years ago where we went from, the family dynamic being one where both people worked, but only one got paid, which was the idea that, one person worked and the other one was a stay-at-home mom or dad. They're working but not getting paid. And we now live in a situation culturally where the whole idea is everyone works, no matter what happens. Even if you are a mom or dad, everybody works. And when you have a system set up where you take a percentage of household income and that is allowed to go towards the mortgage, what has happened to affordability? What's happening to prices? It's going up and up and up and up and up. And unless people are going to turn around on, this whole cultural idea of everybody works, I don't see anything changing there. So yeah, I mean, technically we're entering a buyer's market, but buyers right now have to kind of get more realistic and really, change the idea of what their expectation of buying is. Many buyers now are going to have to get into a FHA 4 family and rent out 3 sides of it. Like, it's not your grandparents' economy anymore. It's a completely different situation.
And I think there's also a mixed signal in some of the markets. Granted, we're starting to see regionally some markets where price appreciation is lower year over year than it was a year ago, but still prices are higher. And then some are leveling out a little more.
Yeah.
So we don't have you and I both know real estate is local,
100.
but we still use some of these national stats to kind of help guide it. But if prices are still up, even year to date, 3.6% overall, it's not true signs of a buyer's market. However,
correct.
Would you agree? I think a lot of sellers out there now, inventories come up. Let's put that on the table. We're at 1.56 million resales and about 500,000 new constructions, for about 2 million. If you compare that to say 2009, we had 4.3 million listings. So we're still only half of the listing count that we had in the buyer's market from over a decade ago. But I think a lot of sellers are unrealistic about their original list price. Would you agree with that or no?
I think that is from the, that I run a coaching company too. That's one of the things we do. And that is probably one of the next big objections that we're, now preparing for, is that you do have sellers that are unrealistic. Look, everyone's unrealistic right now. We just went through a time where, last year we had 4.06 million sales and everybody goes, oh, worst year since 1995. And I'm like, no, it's way worse because there's 72 million more people now than there was. And we're doing the same number of sales. But I think what everybody forgets is that in 2005, there were 7.2 million sales, right? Not this conversation we hear now around, can we get to 4.5? Can we get to 5? There was 7.2 million sales when we have 50 million less people on the planet. And so what's really not being talked about right now is that you have 9 million people between the ages of 26 and 35 that are still living with their parents because they're all waiting to see what happens. And they're just kind of like, okay, what are we going to do here? What's going to happen? And meanwhile, I feel like you're in this Braveheart thing, hold, and everybody's just kind of looking at each other, because you also have a situation where 82% of homeowners have a rate under 6%, which we're not at right now. So they would have to trade to a different, I just did a whole video on this. Are you going to have more home sellers that are going to rent out their home and then buy it? And it's not going to be inventory that's on the market. So I think everybody right now is kind of in this holding pattern of just trying to figure out what's going to be the new norm, and then when you throw in everything else from a technological standpoint and everything, I mean, it's just, everyone's in a holding pattern right now.
Okay. So let me ask you this. If I'm a buyer and come to you and I say, because I think you've always had good advice on this, is now a good time to buy, Jared? What's your response?
I say, what's your long-term goal? What are you going to be there in 2 years? Are you going to be there in 4 years? Are you going to be there? You've heard me say this before. People always ask that question, when's the best time to buy? And they try to do it like it's some kind of, magic trick where you got to match everything at the right time. And then boom, it's like rates with prices and whatever. And like, this isn't crypto. This isn't penny stocks. This is real estate, right? There's never been a 10-year period in the history of the market where it's gone down. And so the answer to the question of when's the best time to buy, well, the first one, just to kind of throw them off a little bit of pattern disrupt, is, 350 years ago, every home in the country, that was the best time to buy. Buy every single home in the country, 350, that's the best time. And then they chuckle a little bit and they go, no, that's not what I mean. I'm like, okay, I get what you mean. The best time to buy is whenever you're ready, willing, and able. Okay. Buying a home, if you plan on being there long-term, is always a great investment. Okay. But if you're not sure what's going to happen, if you're not sure if you're going to be there 6 months from now, if you're not sure, then maybe it's not. And I think a lot of people in our industry need to start to get more realistic about that, because we came through a time where people who did what I do for a living when I was coming up, they would teach these nonsense responses to every buyer and seller. Is it a good time to buy? Yes. Is it a good time to sell? Yes. And there's no nuance. There's no like, well, what's your situation and what is your goals and what is your, And I think that we're now starting to head into a place, especially because of the mixture of technology and these companies that are trying to go end to end, and they're trying to get people into their ecosystems, and they're trying to, leverage this whole economy of convenience thing. I think that we now are at a place where we need to start to look at the lifetime value of clients. And that means answering for what's best for them, even if it doesn't immediately benefit us right now. Telling them maybe it's not a good time for you right now because of your specific situation. But answering that way means when it is right for them a year and a half from now, they do it. When it is right for them to refer you 3 months from now, they do it. And so every situation is different. The right time is when you're ready, willing, and able, and you're going to be there for a bit.
I think one time you told me, and I thought it was a great line, when someone said, I think we were speaking and someone in the audience said, is now a good time to buy? And you've just said, it's never a bad time to own.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly right. That was me. That's exactly, and actually I gotta be honest, I forgot I used to say that. I need to bring that back. But that's right. It's like answer.
I remembered it. I should have
answer a question with a question, man. Like, is it a good time to buy? Is it ever a bad time to own? And like, when you do that, it's like, it completely turns it around and you're making decisions based on a different question, and it's like, oh God, that's a good point. Like, it's never a bad time to own, Now, again, it speaks to the long term because there's still holes in that theory too. It is a bad time to own if you're only going to own for the next 3 months and then try to sell, but the overall idea of that, the overall, when you talk about the American dream and, all this kind of stuff, it's never a bad time to own. Like, do you want to be in ownership? I put this in a video recently, like when people say, should I buy or should I rent? And I always respond and say, what kind of neighborhood do you want to live in? What culture do you want to live in a neighborhood where everybody rents or where everybody owns? Do you want to live in a neighborhood where people like mowing their lawn? There's a difference between mowing your own lawn and mowing your neighbor's lawn. And if you don't understand the difference between mowing your own lawn, what's that?
Do you mow your own lawn?
I mowed my own lawn for the first time in years a couple weeks ago. I got back from a 10 countries in 30 days trip. I was exhausted and I needed a break, and it's a great point though. It's relaxing. And so the question of, if you don't understand the difference between mowing your own lawn and mowing your neighbor's lawn, then you don't understand the difference between owning and renting, that mentality, from a cultural perspective. What kind of society do you want to live in? And that's really what, when you ask the question, is it a good time to buy? Is it ever a bad time to own? It speaks to that. It's like, what kind of society do you want to live in?
Okay. So let's talk about, I mowed my yard, by the way, yesterday.
With scissors? I saw your post.
Oh, that was the back.
God.
Yeah.
What was that?
Well, there's a seam in my turf and it needed a little trimmed. And so my wife happened to take a picture of me trimming the grass that doesn't grow.
So you're telling me that was real?
Uh-huh. Yeah. I'm kind of tight.
You were literally down on your lawn cutting the one.
I went all across the seam, actually. It looks great.
You know what? I want to get angry at you, but like, my wife and I came home the other day, and I'm not going to lie. So like I saw like a line where like a couple of strands were up, and it was like clear that they had missed a small spot. Oh. It did something to me. I was like, what the heck? Like, you completely missed, and she was trying to make me feel better. Maybe the water hit it and that one grew quicker. It was all nonsense. They missed a spot. And I had to go out there and handle it.
See?
Yeah. See? I mean, I didn't post it with me with a pair of scissors.
Not the only crazy one out there. Okay. Now let's get into this. Let's get into skills, and I'm going to give you an example. Let's give agents kind of some advice as we think about these market shifts. And if agents are going to start working with buyers more, and I'll maybe start with one example. I think one mistake, and I just talked to an agent last week. This is a true story. She said, oh my gosh, I had the longest weekend. I'm working with this buyer. We looked at 28 houses. And I read an article last week about buyers markets. Maybe in our future, agents are going to have to show more houses. And I went, wait. That's one thing that if I wanted to tell agents, as you have more inventory and work with more buyers, the goal is not to get exhausted because you need to show them every house that's listed. You should go for the gold, which is you should really only show 3 houses, and you show them in a very specific order. You show the first one that you think they kind of like. And this all means that you did your research and know what they really want, what their wants and needs truly are. You really investigated, not just maybe this neighborhood and 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, but you really figure out what do they want for their lifestyle. And so you show them one that's okay. Then the second house you show them is one that they say is terrible. So number one's looking better already. And then the third one, is the one that they fall in love with and say, let's write it up. Now, is that real? When I sold real estate, could you do that every time and only show 3 houses to get under contract? No, but I think that that's the rule that you're really going after, so you're not wasting your time.
Yeah, I mean, in today's world, it's look, man, if I had a major problem and I was going to visit a psychiatrist, cost versus value, what's more valuable? Somebody who makes me feel like I'm getting my money's worth because it takes 2 years to solve my problem, or the one who sits down the first time and solves it immediately, can see right through what's happening and solves it immediately? What's more valuable? And so I think everybody you talk to would say, oh, duh, yeah, the one the first time, like that's what it is, right? And so we've got to get people to understand the difference between cost versus value, right? When it comes to houses, we have so much technology available to us now. The idea, by the way, of what you just described is the psychology of showing homes. That kind of stuff absolutely works. It's the big screen TV theory. What they used to do in the marketing world is when you would go buy an electronics store, they would have the biggest big screen. Now we have bigger ones, but like it used to be like a 55-inch was like the TV. It was like, oh my God, right? And nobody would buy that TV. But then they would ask them, well, why would you put that TV in there? And it was like, oh, because the intention of the consumer was to buy a 27-inch. But when they saw the 55, they're like, I'm not buying that. But now they bought a 41. And so we can't ignore the psychology of selling. It absolutely is a thing, as long as we're keeping the needs and wants of the consumer at hand, to begin with. But again, what's more valuable? Showing someone homes for 2 years, you can be like, look at all the work I did, or actually finding them the place they're going to call home forever without having to go look at all the nonsense they don't want to see, or that isn't going to be an interest to them, or isn't, we've got abilities today to see things through virtual tours and otherwise, Matterports and whatever, in a way that we never had before. If you're an agent who has not been able to kind of like narrow down the number of properties you see, then you're simply not leveraging what's available to you. And quite frankly, there's somebody else out there who's more valuable than you, that can solve the problem on the first appointment rather than taking 2 years.
Or using some of your tech that is awesome now, because you can see what people are hearting, saving, and it'll create patterns. So don't show them something that's not in that. It sounds kind of trivial, but it was interesting, this conversation with this agent, nearly 30 homes in a weekend. And I thought, that's just too many. You're confusing the client.
Insane, by the way. Like the old adage, what we say is, which is not true, right? Like we have these sayings in this industry that we really need to stop saying. We say things like nosy neighbors, and it's like, that's actually a great client for you. They care because we have this property impact report. Like they want to know everything that's happening to the largest asset that affects their retirement, that affects their wealth. That's not nosy neighbor. That's called, I want to know what's happening with my investment, right? Like that's a good thing. That's a potential prospect. We say things like buyers are liars. And, it's because we're ignoring how emotional this process is. And so you'll have somebody who, says, don't show me anything without 2 full bathrooms. I've got girls in the house. I need more than, 1.5. I need, another full bathroom. And then you find out that they go and buy a house through someone else that had a bath and a half, and they blame you and go, well, why didn't you show it to me? And it's like, well, because you told me. And then we go, well, buyers are liars. And my point in saying that to you is that part of getting to know the client is the technology, no doubt about it. But part of to get to know them is also emotionally what it is that they're after. There's a difference between a house and a home. And when you understand that there's the stats they give you, but then there's when you can really get to the emotional, like what are they actually after in this home? What is it that's going to make them feel like this is home? What is it they're trying to be next to? What is it they're trying to? That is also stuff that helps you eliminate how many properties you look like, what you look at, even when it doesn't fit the exact match of what their profile was that they gave you. It's like going on a dating app and it's like, I want a minimum 6'3" man, that has this light, skin, whatever, and the perfect tan and the, whatever. And then you see that they end up with Ed Sheeran and you're like, what the heck is that?
Was that some kind of reference here? Because Ed Sheeran and I kind of.
Hey, you're Ed Sheeran without the vocals. And so it is one of those things where it's like, he sang a song to them and now they felt like they were loved, and they felt appreciated, and so part of your job is not just to leverage the tech, but it's also to figure out what it is they're actually after, and it's not always the things that they articulate.
So then let me ask you this. If you've been a listing agent working with sellers and stuff's flying off the market, now days on market's a little longer, they're competing with some listings. What would be your advice, 2 or 3 things that you would say to agents either getting listings, that they have listings in a market where days on market are longer, price reductions might happen? How do you help them?
Yeah, I would celebrate it, like think about it. Like we're a culture who complains about no matter what happens. Okay. And so if it's too hot, it's too hot. If it's too cold, it's too cold. If it's like we complain about whatever happens. And what I've heard from so many agents for so long now, over the past 5 years, is how quickly the properties are flying off the shelves, and how it's tough to actually prove your value to the seller, and how it's tough to follow the techniques that trainers like I teach them to generate leads and generate more traffic and generate more. And they go, my God, but it's gone so quick. It's like we schedule an open house. It's gone before the open house even gets there. We try to send out, but it's already, whatever. And so it's funny because the very thing that people were complaining about, we now finally don't have that as an issue in many cases. And so rather than complain about it, let's take advantage of it. When time on market starts to increase, that becomes an opportunity for the right listing agents, because they are now able to demonstrate their marketing value, what it is that they actually do that differentiates them from someone else who just throws it on the MLS and prays. Now I get the chance to actually take every listing and turn it into 2 more listings, or turn it into 2 more buyers. I get to generate content around that and use it for visibility and brand building within my marketplace. I get to actually host open houses where the property is truly available, and not only use it for myself as a lead magnet, use it for myself to get to know the neighborhood, use it for myself to circle prospect. But now I get to feed the people on my team or within my brokerage who need open houses. They need to get in front of people. Now my signs stay out longer, which is brand building, right? What good is it? It's out there, it's gone. And now everybody who calls, it's just like, oh, sorry, it's already gone. Now I get a chance for these to be out there longer. And now the more properties I get in an area, the more they're staying up, and the more people are seeing me, and the more there's eyeballs, and there's more there. So the main thing I would tell you is just be careful of like everything that comes up. There's this mentality to always look at the other side of it and figure out why it's bad. Everything we do, everything we feel, everything comes from the meaning we assign to the thing that's happening, right? This is really deep, and we won't go too far into this. But I said to someone the other day, I said the difference between somebody who experiences great trauma and somebody who gains great wisdom is nothing more than the meaning they assign to the memories. 2 people can go through the same thing, and one's traumatized and one gains wisdom. And what we learn from that, aside from that really deep example right there, what we learn from that is that applies to everything. When properties start to stay on the market longer, instead of looking at it and going, oh crap, I'm panicking because it's different than what it's been, actually look at the opportunity. The meaning that I assign to this is greater brand building, greater lead generation, greater opportunity to perform, greater opportunity to actually put forth the techniques and the tactics that I've been learning, greater opportunity to feed the people under me or people around me, the people in my brokerage, greater opportunity. Like that's what we've been looking for. So change the meaning.
It also reminds me too, patience when market dynamics change, but also I think it's setting up front expectations. Like if I'm going on a listing appointment, I'd say to a seller, if any agent comes in and says we're going to have multiple offers in the first 48 hours, they're not telling you what's really happening on the market. You may not have a showing for your first 14 days, which is okay. And here's why. And here's how we're going to market it a little different. But I think also there are many agents that either have forgotten or never had to set very clear expectations and be the market expert. And I know you're big on video. I think you're with me on this. I wish more agents would pick this thing up and say, hey, 30 seconds. I know people don't like doing video. Here's what's truly happening in the market. If you're a buyer and you're on the fence, here's 1, 2, 3 things you need to know. If you're a seller considering selling, here's 1 or 2 things, 2, 3 things you need to know. Like you've got to be an expert.
Oh, dude, can I just say one thing about this?
Yeah.
To your original point, when you look at what makes a great coach in professional sports, when you look at what makes a great football coach, when you look at what makes a great basketball coach, when you look at, it's not just how they perform when they hit the court, it's the adjustments that are made at halftime. That's where coaches make their money. And so you have to remember that when you go in and you deal with a seller, you in a sense are their coach. And you're going to give them all this data on what's going on in the market and how things look. And this is my recommendation to you. But it's not a bad thing to look at that seller and say, hey, let me ask you something. If I were to tell you, I've already told you that we don't determine the price, the market determines the price. The market is the market. We don't have any say over that. If I were to tell you everything I ever thought was going to happen in the market with my properties was always what happened, do you think that I'd be telling the truth? Do you think I'm full of crap? And they'd be like, I think I'm full of crap. And they'd be like, that's exactly right. There's been times that even I've been surprised. But my job here is not only to put you in a position to win, but it's also to make the adjustments when that happens. And part of setting expectation with these people is also sitting down with them right in the beginning and saying, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what the market's telling us. Here's how we're going to position ourselves. And our job is to respond to feedback. And there's two ways that we get feedback. Most people think feedback is only when someone comes in, looks at the house, and lets us know what that feedback's going to be. And then our job is to respond to that feedback. But if we put this on the market and we do all of this marketing stuff that I'm planning on doing for you and nobody comes in, that is also feedback. And so what we need to do is that we need to start to better position our sellers, especially in a world. And by the way, I know this is not what this podcast is about today, so we won't go deep down this. But we're going to be in an industry soon where people are not doing feedback anymore, where there's lawsuits right now, where buyers agents have gotten in trouble because they gave feedback. Then their buyer went to another property, decided to come back so they didn't get that other property. And now they feel like the seller has some advantage over them because they know what they think about the property. They never knew the buyer's agent was giving feedback to the other side. You have fiduciary responsibility to me. And so we are going to enter a market in the very near future where you're not even going to have feedback anymore. Like, that's going away. So our job is to position the seller in a way where they know what feedback is, even when it doesn't come verbally. Okay. And then how do we respond to that? By the way, we hit 27. We won.
Good advice.
Yeah.
I know you did the coaching thing. Well, that's how you know it's a great coach in real estate, Mr. Jared James. Okay. Last thought. We got to wrap. What's your final thought? What's your big aha, amazing thought that people are going to walk away with and say, this guy's brilliant? What kind of a question is that? I'm not here to brilliantize people. That's not what I do. That's not even a word. I don't think that there's, especially a market like this, and especially where we're at right now, I don't think it's about hitting the brilliant things and what's the, I think that we're heading into a place right now where, like I've said all the time, consistency is undefeated, right? Slow and steady adjustments, the willingness to pivot. I've said many times that this next place we're heading into right now, you won't be eliminated because of all these changes, but you will be eliminated because of your inability to adjust and pivot to the changes that are happening. And so I think that we are 100% heading into a place in our industry. And again, I won't go deep dive into this, but I think we've entered the app storification of our industry, where everybody's trying to get every consumer into their ecosystem and trying to get them to use your tools and your tech. And, now tech is not just about what you're using as an agency. Now it's being moved on to the consumer using it as well, which is going to be a different world. And I think that story for another day, another podcast, when you look at what's happening right now from a technological and an AI standpoint, I think a lot of people in our industry need to start rethinking what their value is, because a lot of the things that we're standing on and saying that this is what I do, more than just open the door, this is what I do, it's all replaceable now. So much of that is going to be a commodity. And so ultimately, I think many agents in our industry need to follow people like me and others that are going to kind of guide you through that process of what does it look like moving forward? What are the pivots that are going to have to happen? It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be unlike anything that many of the people in our industry have seen. And for those who make the adjustments, we're going to have a lot less agents moving forward, but those less agents are going to make a lot of money. And the rest are going to move on to whatever other career, they can get into and fill up a void. But there are some major changes coming. And again, that's a story for another day. But yeah, industry's changing, and you better be willing to pivot and adjust with that. That's great. And that's why I asked you the question, because everyone wants the miracle answer for the market at the time. What's the one thing? And there isn't one thing. And so I set that up with you intentionally, knowing that you were going to say, you have to be consistent. You have to continue to support
Nick, look what we
just
just did. I just announced that we do our yearly event every year, the Jared James Advance. And like, I just announced the next one's going to be our last one. And everybody's like, what the heck? What's going on? And I said, guys, it's not the end of something. It's the beginning of something. Like that event, when you look at how our consumers are operating, you look at how agents are doing, what's going on in the industry, it hinders us now. I've got 30 plus pages of notes. And it's like every 2 months, 10 pages of my notes don't matter anymore because it's changed so much. And you're constantly saving it for that event. It's like, we need to be able to adjust and say, we need to do more pop-ups. We need to be able to, 30 days from now, we'll be here and speak directly to the industry at the moment that it needs it. And that's an example of me doing exactly what I'm saying to everybody listening right now. You need to be willing to make tough decisions. You need to be able to pivot. You need to be willing to do things that make other people go, is something wrong? Is something, because you're not following status quo. You know, we're entering a different world, and status quo is not going to win anymore. Everything has to be on the table, and that's who's going to survive.
All right. So I'm going to tell everyone, go to jaredjamestoday.com, follow him, go on social, any one of the platforms. He's always out there multiple times a week with what's happening and to keep everybody informed. Jared, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Nick. I'll talk to you soon, man. I'm sure.
Always fun. Go mow your lawn. All right, everyone. Great conversation with Jared James, as it is always. Go check him out, jaredjamestoday.com. You can follow because you'll stay more informed about the industry. He knows exactly what's going on and is just down to the point. And it's something that I've always respected about him. He doesn't have the same shtick that he had 5 years ago. He watches the market and changes the advice as it continues. Thanks for joining us today. One reminder, go to AskT3.com, ask a question, give us an idea, and we'll see you here next time.